I'm Debbie Costa, the Preparedness Liaison on the New Jersey FEMA Integration Team. On behalf of our team working to strengthen preparedness across New York, New Jersey, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands, I'm thrilled to welcome you to this webinar today. As part of FEMA's 2018 to 2022 strategic plan, our goal one is to build a culture of preparedness. The Individual and Community Preparedness Division is focused on helping people prepare for disasters, which includes increasing the percentage of people with savings set aside for an emergency, delivering training to help nonprofits and community-based organizations continue service delivery following a disaster, and increasing the percentage of people who have taken preparedness action. As part of our goal to create a culture of preparedness, we're pleased to be hosting this month's webinar on continuity, why you should care, and how we can help. This webinar will inform you on how FEMA National Continuity Programs can help you and your organization prepare to create a more resilient nation equipped to sustain essential functions and deliver critical services under all conditions, like COVID-19. We are excited to have Emma Poon here to explain this process to you today. We also have a special guest speaker, Keith Adams, from New Jersey VOAD, to provide a case study example specific to COVID-19. Emma Poon is the Regional and Stakeholders Branch Chief within FEMA National Continuity Programs, Plans, Policy, and Evaluations Division. She coordinates and facilitates outreach efforts to deliver continuity support for the whole community, which includes providing continuity policy, guidance, initiatives, and technical assistance. Ms. Poon leads a team of national continuity analysts embedded in the regions to complement and support existing regional continuity programs with a focus on continuity from a national perspective to include continuity of government and devolution. Keith Adams is the Executive Director of the New Jersey Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster, NJVOAD. From 2014 through 2018, he served as the organization's chairperson. The organization's mission is focused on building disaster-resilient communities throughout New Jersey. NJVOAD improves outcomes for people and communities affected by disasters by facilitating cooperation, communication, coordination, and collaboration among nonprofit organizations, community-based groups, government agencies, and for-profit companies. He has served as a subject matter expert, resource to state and VOAD recovery leadership throughout the United States. Emma, I'll turn it over to you to kick us off.
Awesome. Thank you for the nice introduction. So, like we said, my name is Emma Poon, and I am the Regional and Stakeholders Branch Chief at National Continuity Programs in FEMA. I spent 7 years in the Air Force playing with nuclear weapons as a missile combat crew commander, and now I'm trying to rectify my karma by, instead of being the potential cause of a continuity event, help communities and organizations prepare for a bad day or, an inconvenient day. So the reason why I'm here is to talk a little bit about continuity planning and how it's really more than just a plot point to some TV show or major movie or, things like Designated Survivor and all sorts of things that we hear about under the threat of nuclear Armageddon and Cold War doctrines and theories. And we see this right now as we start dealing with the COVID pandemic and the different impacts we're having and seeing in our communities. So continuity planning is really what we owe ourselves and our organizations and our communities to make sure that we, in the roles and responsibilities that we hold, don't abandon the trust that has been bestowed upon us to serve the communities that we work with. So why does FEMA care? Why do we have to, deal with this and work with this? In 2014, FEMA and the Department of Labor did a study. Yes, it was a study focused on hurricane impacts, but very similar thought process, very similar things we have to consider with minor differences. 40% of small businesses don't reopen after a crisis. And in this study, it was the crisis of the hurricane. 25% more closed within a year after the crisis. And 75% without continuity plans will fail within 3 years. So these statistics impact your communities. the environment in which you have to work, and the ability for all of us to be able to provide essential services. And like I said, while the study was focused on the impacts of a hurricane, we're seeing these concerns today in a world that can potentially look very different once we emerge from the pandemic that we're dealing with. So ultimately, no matter what your job or function you and your organization perform, it is really your resilience that helps keep this country and the citizens within it resilient as well. So to provide a little more context, some background, why is FEMA here talking to me about keeping my organization running? We are obligated under Presidential Policy Directive 40. FEMA is assigned the task of developing and promulgating continuity planning guidance to the whole community. So from our perspective, we have the unique ability to see the whole of nation aspect of continuity of operations, especially as it relates to ensuring that the government of the U.S. is up and running no matter what the threats or hazards that we face. So how do we do that? We kind of have these overarching thoughts on what the national picture looks like and what the federal government's obligated to provide. We focus our planning on 8 national essential functions. So we have continuation of our form of government, providing visible leadership to the American people, defending the United States against all enemies, maintaining relationships with foreign nations, protecting the homeland and bringing to justice criminals, and number 6, which is FEMA's job, rapid and effective response and recovery from crisis, protecting the nation's economy, and providing federal government services. So a lot of what we do at the national federal level is focus on those things. But to do those things, we need to understand that we exist together as a nation. And I've always equated continuity with the circle of life. And I hope some of you started humming that song in your head. To paraphrase Mufasa from The Lion King, everything you see exists together in a delicate balance. You need to understand that balance and respect all creatures. And so we are all connected in the great circle of life. So what you see in front of you is a NEF wheel. Yes, it's a bit of an eye chart, but you can see a version of this in the Continuity Guidance Circular, which is available on the Resource Toolkit, a link that's further on in the slides. But it kind of articulates how everyone at all levels can help contribute to the circle of life. The loss or the degradation of any of your organizations or any people within the community or within the nation has significant impacts to that circle of life. And right now we are seeing this as things are getting shut down, restaurants are being impacted, services that we don't normally equate as being critical or essential is being framed completely differently because of what we're seeing and how interconnected we all are. So in that sense, I'm going to kick it off to Mr. Keith Adams, who is someone currently using their continuity plans to serve the community. So Keith, off to you.
Thanks, Emma. I'm working on my karma too. I've retired actually after a 30-year career working for the Department of Defense. So ever since, I've been working to get it right. So I'm glad to be here with all of you today. So first of all, a little bit about our organization, its background. We are New Jersey Voluntary Organizations Active in Disaster. We're a coalition of organizations that contribute to developing and sustaining community resilience throughout the disaster cycle. So we don't just stand up in disasters, we work constantly to prepare, respond, recover, and then mitigate disasters. At our foundation is relationships, building partnerships to improve outcomes for people and communities affected by disasters by facilitating cooperation, communication, coordination, and collaboration among our nonprofit organizations, community-based groups, government agencies, and for-profit companies. And of course, here in Region 2, we work very closely with our FEMA partners. We're the New Jersey affiliate of National VOAD, the recognized non-governmental leader of disaster preparedness, response, and recovery sector. We're the only disaster network in New Jersey that links and harnesses both the power of voluntary organizations and the government. Our VOAD members and partners represent a powerful force of goodwill in both our local communities and across New Jersey. Through our network, we provide the leadership that makes our community stronger and more resilient. That in times of need delivers hope for a more positive future. So when I go around the country and even across the state and I talk about our role and the role of our organizations, I often say that every day is a disaster for someone in New Jersey. And I can hear you all, those of you who are not from New Jersey, that are chuckling a little bit about that because I know you like to bash it. And that's okay. But what we say is every day is a disaster for someone in New Jersey. And what we mean by that is that we have a context, just like all of you do in your communities. And that is that we have a lot of folks that are poor. As a matter of fact, 10% of our overall population are poor, and almost 14% of them are kids. We have a pretty large homeless population. Our last count was over 10,000. Over 1 million of our residents are food insecure, so they go to bed hungry, and over a third of them are kids. And we have almost 1 million people who are grappling with serious mental illness daily. And of course, like you, our most prevalent disaster is house fires. And in New Jersey, on an average day in New Jersey, 30 folks will experience a house fire. So why do I say that? Well, that's our context before we even have a disaster like the current pandemic. And our organizations break down, whether they're community groups or they're member organizations like the American Red Cross or Salvation Army or others, are responding to these kind of smaller disasters that are occurring to individuals and households. Our members and groups are concerned about hunger and homelessness and poverty in their communities, and they're working to do that every day. And they're mostly nonprofits. But what they do is very important. It's very important to the folks that they serve in the community. And that's really something that gets stressed when something happens that affects your organization's ability to carry out those missions. And of course, as you all know, we're experiencing this in New Jersey in a very acute way right now, and many of you across the country are seeing that as well. So ensuring continuity of operations starts with a solid continuity plan for your organization, agency, or business. So right now, my organization, and actually most of my partners in nonprofit and even the state government at this point in New Jersey, is working under a COOP. So a COOP meaning short for Continuity of Operations Plan. So although much of our work is remote here at New Jersey GOAT every day, we've had to adjust to the challenges of social distancing and sheltering at home restrictions, both in how we do our work and as how we assign our volunteers throughout the state. So we've been kind of forced to think a little out of the box. So, I think the thing that most has concerned us in this pandemic is that we've also had to pay particular attention to our succession lines. As in this particular disaster, we all have the potential to become sidelined by COVID-19. So unlike a natural disaster where a storm or a flood, tornado, hurricane has affected a fixed population, and if we're lucky enough, we're not in the area that's affected, and our operations are, good to go. In this particular case, each and every one of us has the potential to be a survivor of this pandemic. So it was really important for us to have that plan. And having that plan in place allows us at least a guidance framework to build on. And, like all plans, we couldn't anticipate every potential scenario that would arise. But again, having that plan is kind of our backbone to be able to refer to and then kind of adjust it and be agile as we carried out in this particular disaster has been very helpful. And probably the most important part about having a plan that was developed ahead of time is it certainly was a lot better for us to be thinking through this outside, if you will, and I'll go back to my defense roots and say outside of the heat of battle. The time to actually create one of these plans optimally and to start thinking about your continuity of operations is before a disaster, strikes. And, here at New Jersey and certainly in Region 2 of FEMA, we know firsthand through our experience in Superstorm Sandy that it's important to work on our group plans and our response plans and be working to with our community groups and our communities right down to the very local level if possible. Because we know that disaster-resilient communities respond and recover from disaster better and faster. In Superstorm Sandy, we did not have as a robust network of folks hooked in, and we struggled for a very long time, both through response and also in recovery, just making these very important relationships and plans. So developing COOP and emergency plans are an important part of building community resilience. Relationships are built through developing these plans both within your own organization and with your community partners. And these pay dividends as you carry out your everyday missions and double dividends, I would say, if not more, during a disaster. So in addition to connecting our national and statewide partners, we also encourage community organizations to join one of our networks of affiliate community organizations active in disaster. You'll hear that referred to with the acronym COAD, C-O-A-D. These organizations are organized within each, here in New Jersey, with each of one of our 21 counties. We also offer continuity of operations plan training and other training and consulting services to assist businesses and community organizations. So if you'd like more information about that training, you can certainly reach out and contact me, and my contact information is on the screen. Every state and territory, all 56, have a state or territorial VOAD organization that exists. You can find them if you want to connect by going to NVOAD, that's NVOAD.org. And there is a listing there with contact information if you'd like to connect up with your state folks. And they can also refer you to any local VOADs or COADs that are in your particular community. And I would encourage you to do so. Again, this is about building resilience down to the very lowest level, and that really, at the end of the day, has to do with the relationships we make before the disaster strikes. So, thank you. I don't know if there's any questions.
Thank you so much, Keith. I didn't see any questions come in, but let's give them a minute. If anybody has a question for Keith, unfortunately, he has another commitment this afternoon. You can type them in the Q&A box now. Otherwise, we will be sharing the slide deck, and this is being recorded. So Keith was gracious enough to say that if anybody had a specific question, that he would be happy to get to it at some point in the future. Feel free to email him. I feel like
Thank you, Debbie.
somebody is, I'm sorry, I feel like I see people typing questions in the chat box instead of the Q&A, but let's see, this looks like a FEMA question, and FEMA help with recovery plan on the school level. So we could save that for Emma. And I think there was one other. How is New Jersey tracking volunteer hours if they have a declared emergency at the local level, specifically for their 25% cost share of the declaration? Keith, can you field that question?
Sure, I sure can. So right now, we are still in the very early stages around that. So the way it typically works in New Jersey is that this is not something that's done with a statewide view. Typically, disasters actually go down to our county government level in terms of cost tracking. And each county OEM actually kind of produces their own way of tracking that. So what we're advising our folks to do is to actually track all the volunteer hours that their agencies are involved in, and also the expenses that may be eligible under Part B as well. But we've actually provided them with a spreadsheet to capture those hours, and then with a description alongside, so that at least when we actually get to the process of working through that in the days to come, that they will have something at least that they can refer back to. Because unfortunately, we're just not that far along in our paperwork chain to do that. But thanks for that question.
Thank you, Keith. All right, I think the rest of the questions seem to be FEMA related, so we will thank you very much for participating in today's webinar and appreciate you answering any questions that might come up that are more related to your field. And thank you and have a wonderful day. I appreciate everything that you do.
Thank you, and thank everybody on the call for devoting this time to this really important topic. And I wish that you all stay well, please.
Great. Same to you. Be healthy. All right, Emma, it's back to you.
Awesome. Yeah, regarding the question about recovery planning, I don't work in FEMA recovery, but I'm sure if you shoot an email to the people that organize this, we can loop you into recovery folks in recovery offices to answer that question about recovery planning. So I hope that answered that question. So moving on, so we heard from Keith and how it, is really a whole community effort, and that's exactly what we are trying to message and push throughout the, the spectrum of emergency management and continuity of operations and just operations in general. Whole of community preparedness is critical. If you can handle a large-scale disaster, everything else becomes a minor inconvenience. And as you start seeing what we're dealing with right now with COVID, it is a pretty large-scale disaster, but fortunately it is moving fairly slowly, and we have time to make adjustments and time to make some plans and time to really take a good concerted effort into what our capabilities are. And we've learned a lot of different things throughout the course of our interactions with different disasters. We internally in FEMA learned a lot in 2017 when we had the back-to-back-to-back hurricanes with Harvey, Irma, and Maria. So we know the importance of organizations understanding how they interoperate and the need for mutually beneficial agreements, both before, during, and after a disaster. Same thing is popping up right now in terms of how interconnected we are and how we have to work together to really make things happen. The need to regularly exercise and implement emergency plans. Just because you have a plan and if you don't use it or practice it, you might as well not, because in the time of need, you won't realize it's there and you're not trained to use it. Organizations, that do remain functioning, that are resilient, that are able to continue their operations, they end up becoming beacons of hope for their community. When things are chaotic and things are scary, those that are still running and still up and providing the services that they're, obligated to provide, that is critical to every community and every disaster. So we are watching all of this unfold slowly. We're asking ourselves these questions. How do essential services continue? Who are essential personnel? What happens if decision makers are incapacitated? Where do we work? How do we work? And many of these questions can be answered through robust continuity planning. And we're so used to continuity plans being just having an alternate site that we can go to and just continue our functions. But it's a lot more nuanced and complex than that. And it's in the planning and the understanding of the why that can help shape our responses to any incident. So this is why, like even Keith was saying, we always preach the importance of continuity, even when it's a blue sky day. The time, the energy, and the effort that could be used for critical life safety decisions and tasks could be used better and saved if we used our existing continuity plans and if existing continuity planning had been done. So ultimately, continuity planning helps us be better in a disaster. It takes care of us so that we can make smarter decisions, be safer, and ultimately be more resilient. And as much as we say continuity should be done before a disaster, it's really not too late to start, especially as we start learning the lessons and considerations that we have to consider throughout this process right now. So we also understand the importance of people and how to take care of your people, how do you communicate with your people, and then how do you manage messaging and then misinformation. How do you maintain all these things? How do you make a stand in terms of understanding who, when, where, how, and why your messages are going out? So proper communication and messaging and the continuity of those functions instills trust within your community and helps those that are actively helping the community by communicating the correct information and being able to coordinate appropriately with all your stakeholders. So you sit back and you end up thinking, who are you? Are you one of the 40% that don't come back after a crisis? Are you one of the 25% that still struggle within a year? Are you one of the 75% that fails within 3 years? You end up needing to make that choice and that conscious decision of, is it worth it to do this level of planning to make sure that I'm surviving? So crisis, whether it's a hurricane, active shooter, wildfire, pandemic, or even just a building fire, a burst pipe, or any number of normal things that could adversely affect your ability to do your jobs, can impact these things and can impact your ability to serve your constituents. So when we speak to people about continuity, we always find that it's hard to get leadership buy-in. Although right now, leadership buy-in is the least of our concerns. I think everybody's starting to buy in now. So it's a great opportunity to start the conversation and get these things going and get that planning set up for not just this current incident, but moving forward as well. So how do we take this and convince senior leadership, management, elected officials to care about continuity? Everything that we're seeing right now, everything that we're learning is exactly why. We owe it not just to ourselves, we owe it to the communities that we're from, that we serve, we owe it to the nation, and ultimately we owe it to our friends and families that we go home to, because the things that we do and the things that we provide collectively as a nation is essential to everybody. So we end up taking a lot of these things for granted, that level of resiliency, but a lot of organizations at a small scale does these things regularly. And just because we take some of it for granted when we're not in crisis mode, it doesn't mean that the effort hasn't been there to make sure that things still happen the way it should, even when bad things happen. We always assume that things will always be there and things will always be available to us when we need them. That doesn't happen magically. It happens through robust planning. It happens through the care and the effort and the investment to, create that environment of planning and understanding of processes and tasks and functions and that continuity spectrum. So what happens when things are bad? We have examples of different organizations doing that. The Naval Support Activity in Bethesda, their firehouse caught fire. But just because their firehouse caught fire doesn't mean that fire operations stop because something happened to the firehouse. Does 911 say, sorry, we have our own emergency to deal with, good luck? No, that's not how things work. Planning and coordination before an incident is that hallmark of resiliency and is the epitome of continuity of operations. Even though the term continuity isn't used to describe situations like these, it's exactly what continuity offers and provides. Another example is the food bank in Santa Barbara that was impacted by mudslides and wildfires in 2017. The community that it served needed food and supplies, and those people's needs weren't going to stop just because the food bank's ability to address those needs were impacted. So even during Hurricane Harvey, the city manager of Alvin, Texas, learned that communication is important before, during, and after a crisis. So in his context, this is a direct quote from him: "Every employee is essential during a disaster and may have to work outside their comfort zones. We need to keep up morale and a sense of humor. We need to provide time for employees to deal with their issues." And this is where the circle of life comes in. Everyone plays a role. Communities start working together, and they need to prioritize all the things that need to happen. Another example, the assistant city manager of the city of Ventura, California, said in 2017 about the wildfires and mudslides, "Our emergency plan drives the response. And once we realize that it takes the whole organization to deal with an event this encompassing, including fighting fire, evacuation, protecting the community from looting, managing the road system, setting up shelters, managing animals, monitoring public health issues from smoke and ash, dealing with water and sewage issues, planning on getting businesses and schools open, and thinking about the future with potential for rain and mudslides, and additionally, all the normal operations at City Hall have to continue." So there's a lot of things to unpack in that statement, where there's so many things going on that have to continue. And we have to be able to have that foundation in place to make sure that continues. And in situations like these, are we engaging with everybody that does those things? Are we coordinating our efforts? Are we engaging with people that we don't normally think to engage with? The school system, how are they integrated? They're trying to continue their essential functions, but we have some jurisdictions contemplating using schools as morgues right now, or schools as COVID treatment centers. But is that actual integration? Does that impact the school's ability to do their essential functions, like providing food to students, providing services, and all these different things? So we can't be planning in a vacuum. We exist in this circle of life, and all the things that we are trying to do need to be coordinated. What about the court systems? How many things need to happen? What about, restraining orders, all those, for life and safety issues? How are those continuing? How are we coordinating to make sure those things are still happening? Do we have that fundamental understanding? How are those services helping or are in need of help during this incident? And then ultimately answering and asking the question of, where does your organization fit into all this? So there's a lot to think about here, and there's a lot to start unpacking and working on to get those answers. And there's no true, correct answer. It's all dependent upon your organization and what your risk level is and how much you're willing to accept. But there is no time like the present to get started on working on these questions and thoughts. And another example is, just like the impact of a firehouse affects the whole community if not properly taken care of, we have other incidents that could potentially happen, including shootings, which can impact your organization. So in 2013, an active shooter incident occurred at the Navy Yard in Washington, D.C., and it really only impacted one building. But it's never really just an only, as we're starting to see throughout all these different examples. When you have to plan for not being able to continue your functions during an incident, you have to consider long-term impacts and implications. So during the shelter or a shooting incident, you are sheltered in place for hours. You have to consider, what will your organization be doing then? What will your stakeholders need of you that you can't provide? In this particular incident, 3 weeks of crime scene investigation, where no one was allowed inside to retrieve their belongings. So what did people leave behind that they would need? How are you taking care of your people then? Even right now, as people are working from home, what things that they have in the office that they would have needed? What did they leave behind? A lot of folks are like, oh my gosh, my plant's going to die. All these different things as you start, veering away from your normal day-to-day activity have a lot of long-range impacts and implications. So how are you taking care of your people when you're operating in a very different environment? In the case of Navy Yard, it took 17 months and $6.4 million for that building to come back. And there wasn't even structural damage to the building itself. But they did completely redesign the building, where they moved the entry where the shooter had come in. They changed the paint and carpet schemes, and also moved the offices around so that when people did come back, it didn't look exactly like it did that day when the terrible tragedy happened. So how would you and your organization handle 17 months of being unable to return to your facility? Right now, we're going on about 2 months or so, and you're starting to see cracks. You're starting to see things that you wouldn't normally see. You're starting to get questions that you wouldn't normally have to answer. You're starting to need policies and need, plans to account for things that you didn't normally think about. But, in the instance of Navy Yard, it's fortuitous that the Coast Guard had moved to the DHS facility in a different area of D.C., that the Navy Yard personnel was able to move to the old Coast Guard facility at Buzzard Point. But ultimately, things like dealing with the emotional trauma of returning to a facility that something terrible happened in, some folks didn't want to return. And the Navy did try their best to make sure people were given the opportunity to get comfortable. But this is the real-world impact of continuity plans, continuity procedures, or for some people, backup plans, backup procedures, whatever you want to call it. At some point, you have to return to normal. And what normal looks like is very different and depends on the situation. So that kind of brings us to what we're trying to grasp and wrap our heads around right now. How can we apply continuity now? Continuity is a critical piece of what's going on in the world and in the United States right now. How can we best protect our people, our services, our functions, our organizations? Anytime you have to dig deep and come up with backup plans or alternate strategies, that is continuity. And continuity planning can help you frame how you can make better and more informed decisions. We have something we call the 4 pillars of continuity. And in no particular order, it's people, leadership, facilities, and communication. Knowing who your people are and understanding how each of them contribute to the essential functions of your organization are critical to ensuring their safety and maintaining those essential functions. The use of the business process analysis and business impact analysis, of which we have a user's guide available on the Continuity Resource Toolkit, again, the link is later in the slides, can help an organization analyze their essential functions so that you can determine what tasks are needed to be accomplished to ensure that those functions can continue uninterrupted. And then based on those understanding of those tasks and those interdependencies, you can better grasp what personnel are needed to do those things, as well as where and how they can do them. So if personnel need to be somewhere to do these tasks, turning knobs, touching buttons, clicking things, moving equipment or whatever, those people are the ones that are the frontline employees And when they're out there doing these things, they should be protected, and there should be people trained to back them up in case, you need additional people. But if people don't need to be somewhere to do their tasks, they should be allowed to work from home or another organization to contribute to that mission. All other personnel can be doing other day-to-day activities until that point in which they need to be reassigned to maintain those essential functions. And this is a concept that we've kind of termed graceful degradation. As more people become unavailable, whether it's through illness or because of other circumstances, whether it's childcare issues or personal issues or whatever, they're unavailable. How do we reprioritize existing resources towards those essential functions that have been identified through that planning process, through that business process analysis? How do we do that? So this is where it's really important to understand where your people are, how they support the mission, and how to best reprioritize things based on what you've already prioritized as essential functions. Another key aspect is leadership, and that's a really important factor as well to make sure that organizations have visible leadership and ones that are authorized to make the decisions and having that person available. As we saw the Prime Minister of Great Britain, at any given moment, somebody can get sick, something can happen quickly and without warning. Organizations need to consider who is a successor to the boss and whether or not that successor has the same legal authorities to serve that job. Are they trained? Are they authorized to make that decision? Can they commit money? Can they do funding? Can they release funding? Can they allocate resources? Can they do that coordination legally? And those are a lot of different things to, again, account for with your legal staff and personnel. And we always recommend that, maintaining a deep bench, at least 3 deep, and if possible, someone out of area just in case, because you never know. And in this instance, continuity and facilities is generally what a lot of people equate continuity with. Facilities is not the be-all, end-all of continuity. Just because your plans say, if something happens, we'll just relocate to our continuity site, that doesn't make it the right answer. In this particular instance with COVID, relocating your staff to another location doesn't change the risk that they're facing whatsoever. Now, if we do that, instead of being exposed at a primary location, you're being equally exposed somewhere else. You're not mitigating any of those risks, and you're not helping your mission and helping your people whatsoever. But having alternate locations to work, which does include teleworking, is a force multiplier. In a world of social distancing, you can make use of all of those locations that you have and you have access to make sure that people are separated as much as possible. Don't move everyone to the same place, but you can say most of the people can do their job from home, so they stay there, distance from everybody else. But if people need to be in the office and need to access certain systems, if you have alternate facilities, people can be in different places, further amplifying that resiliency that you have. You may need to find additional locations to do work. Just like hospitals are being created out of parking lots and convention centers. Continuity planning helps you understand what you're building out for, because you understand what your essential functions are and how they're done, rather than, kind of panicking and deciding, oh, I need this, this, and this, but really, does any of that make sense? You're really trying to make the best use of the funding, the resources, and the people that you have to try to do your job, independent of what facility you may or may not have. So we're also seeing how critical communication is, especially as people are spread in multiple locations, trying to do things that they would normally do face-to-face in a virtual environment. You need to understand that business processes, that, through your business process analysis, what systems are needed, what files and records need to be accessed, accounting for how those things can be still done while everybody's scattered. Continuity communications isn't just about the fancy satellite phones or gadgets or secret squirrel kind of tools and things. It's the tools and mechanisms that you and your organization need to make sure you have, that you can communicate within and also externally to your customers and stakeholders. Whether we're doing Microsoft Teams, Zoom, or all these other virtual chat functions that we're using right now. These are all tools in your toolbox that can be used to continue some semblance of normalcy and to continue your operations. So as you can see, many of the stuff and things that are required for a comprehensive continuity capability is serving that foundation, as that foundation for making informed decisions during a pandemic or during any situation. We may not immediately need to activate a continuity plan, but the strategies, the capabilities, the thought processes have already existed and have already been thought through. Just need to dust it off and apply it to the situation at hand. And this applies to any situation, not just a global pandemic or whatever disaster of the month is. If an organization hasn't done this already, it's not too late to apply these same principles to develop plans for the here and now, and ultimately for the future when you can, start thinking about other things that potentially could be happening. And for us at FEMA, we're terrified of hurricane season coming up. That's going to be scary. So once you do all this planning, you start thinking about the next step. Like I was mentioning with the Navy Yard, reconstitution. Now that we've spread to the wind and doing things differently and doing things however we can to make things continue, pandemic is an interesting use of reconstitution concepts. And reconstitution just means bringing everything back to normal or a new normal. It's also called recovery. It could be called a lot of different things, just going back to work or whatever. So as we've discussed with Navy Yard, reconstitution could be about a physical location. But in this particular instance, in the scenario that we're seeing right now, again, it's more nuanced. We should be thinking about how we should return to normal probably right now during any downtime in the operations. And then consider what changes in policies and plans have been used and made that could potentially carry over to the new normal that can make your organization more efficient and better or more resilient moving forward. So I've outlined some planning considerations to consider for when to come back from this. Obviously following the guidance from the CDC and following the guidance from the experts of when it's safe to bring people back in the office. But then what is that process and procedure to ensure that facilities are safe? How are you making sure that things are being cleaned, things are disinfected? Who is responsible for that? And how is that facility being rendered safe? Is there a priority for what areas would be rendered safe first if your entire building potentially could have been contaminated or had people infected? Who decides when the incident's over and the organization can return to normal operations? Are people just going to see what's on the news and then rush back to work? What is that notification process from your leadership on down? And then how do you notify stakeholders that you've returned to normal? And what is the impact of that, of people starting to come back to work and starting to go back to normal? Then you have, your personnel. What is their status? Were any impacted by the incident? Did you lose any personnel? Whether they lost their life or they just opted not to return to work. Were people impacted in terms of their families? Like, did they lose somebody because of this? What are the policies for those that can't immediately come back to work? How do you address those staffing shortfalls if those people just don't come back permanently for whatever reason? How do you message that it's safe to return? Is everybody returning at the same time? Are you phasing people back in? Especially as we start talking pandemic and needing to social distance, maybe it's not a good idea to rush everybody back on the same day. Maybe it's better to phase people in week by week or however your process is. It really kind of depends. And there's no right answer. It's what's right for your organization and your people. And ultimately, it's also ensuring that after-action review about how effective your continuity plan, or if you didn't have one, how effective it would have been to have a continuity plan and take those lessons learned to create one. And then document that in a corrective action plan so that you can make these changes moving forward. So if this happens again, whether it's next year or 10 years from now or 20 years from now, that you have thought about that and you have thought about these things. So how can we help? And what we do at FEMA National Continuity Programs is a fantastic thing that we are trying to move forward and try to help people become more resilient by developing continuity plans. The Continuity Guidance Circular is a document that's available, again, on the resource toolkit that we've developed to help guide continuity planners at all levels from all different types of organizations to think about continuity from a more holistic standpoint, and stressing that continuity is flexible and adaptable. It's not the be-all, end-all. It's not the nuclear Armageddon. It's how do we make ourselves more resilient? And one of the best things I've ever heard about this Continuity Guidance Circular, which not to toot my own horn, but I am slightly biased. I co-wrote this document, and it is one of my favorite things that I've ever done professionally. However, the best compliment I've ever gotten on this document was from a planner from the state of Virginia. He told me this was the only FEMA document that he's ever read twice. And I consider that a book jacket kind of review that I will cherish forever. So I highly recommend taking a look at this document to help frame your understanding of continuity and the principles you can apply to COVID and any other disaster. So the CGC lays out that vision for the more resilient nation through whole community integration, so that we can do all the things we need to do to sustain our abilities to continue our functionality. So without continuity planning, organizations, communities, and our government may not be able to provide those services to help fellow citizens in need when it is needed the most. And we're seeing that with, organizations struggling to figure out how do we best allocate resources to continue doing what we have to do. We're starting to see a lot of different functions turn off because they're not essential, only to turn back on again once they realize, oh, wait, this is actually essential because, it's this other function depends on it. So this collectively is a shared responsibility, and it's built upon that foundation of resiliency of individuals and local communities, and it permeates throughout the public and private sectors, nonprofit, faith-based, all levels of government, including local, regional, metropolitan, state, tribal, territorial, federal. Everybody is involved in making sure America continues to exist and continues to function and will still be there when we emerge out of whatever disaster that we are currently in battling with. So in this sense, we also have another tool that we have available. It's the continuity assessment tool. It's a resource for organizations and jurisdictions to be able to kind of assess where they are currently. A lot of organizations may not have continuity plans, but the tool is designed to be really general, and it's almost designed to be a project plan, milestones to hit, to build and create a continuity program moving forward. It's designed to be general enough to identify potential gaps in your capabilities, but applicable through different emergency management and continuity standards that organizations may use. So you may have things that are EMAP certified or things that are certified through different organizations. You may have different plans that are approved. This doesn't take away from any of that. This is supposed to enhance and help you frame a discussion with your leadership about how do you improve continuity capability. The goal for the CAT is to help organizations attain that continuity capability beyond just a plan. Just having a plan doesn't do you much good if you don't have a capability to back that up. As the city of Ventura learned, that emergency manager said, you can prepare all you want, but it's hard to do it until you live the case study that you're in the moment. And right now we are in that moment, and we need to be able to capture all that and build on it. So the CAT attempts to take those lessons learned from those incidents, this incident, and try to guide the planners and program managers to form and create true capability. Tool is best used in its electronic format. It's currently in Excel form. We're developing a PDF version, and it auto-populates into a summary worksheet at the end. So it's broken out into separate things for you to be able to frame where you are at and be able to identify what specific things you can work on. It's intended to be used regularly, so you can do a CAT assessment on yourself, once a year or whatever, just to kind of see where you are. Whether or not you're dropping in some areas or getting better in some areas, or if you have limited resources and funding, you can make informed decisions of, well, this year this area is good, let's focus on this. We can't do all these things, so let's focus on the weakest area. And by areas, I mean we divided it into 3 sections. The CAT has the getting started section, so for organizations that are just creating a continuity capability, building that capability. So for organizations that, they've already gotten started, they're starting to build capability, they're investing in things, they're creating plans and programs and training, and then ultimately the maintaining a capability, which is the three sections. And all 3 sections are used concurrently throughout the process. And we see this because organizations may have been able to build a capability or may have started but haven't gotten to the building aspect, or have built one but didn't quite maintain it. So a lot of times when we see continuity programs, it's it's a plan that's been sitting on a shelf. Like, yes, we wrote a continuity plan 10 years ago, and it's sitting on a shelf. That doesn't do you any good because, again, that doesn't build that capability, nor does it maintain that capability if nobody's read the plan or done anything with it. So as organizations evolve and change, processes evolve and change. So the planning process needs to constantly be able to keep up with those evolutions. So you could be reviewing that getting started portion every time you do an exercise and you learn things. Every time you deal with a pandemic and you learn things, you have to get started all over again to understand, okay, does this plan as it currently sits work? Otherwise, we need to restart and try to update and build and maintain all over again. Very cyclical process. So organizations that have not maintained plans and programs so well, again, that does not break into an actual capability. So each of those three sections of getting started, building, and maintaining is broken down into the POETI model: planning, organization, equipment, training, and exercise. So have you done the planning? Have you done the organizational thought? Have you invested in equipment? Have you done training? Have you exercised? So once you start doing these things, it's a 10-point scoring system that kind of is color-coded that helps you identify where specifically you are the weakest. So this is kind of our color-coded scoring system. We have heard different stories from people who have used the tool. 0 obviously is I have made little progress, and 10 is the standard and what we want to push as the gold standard. It's designed to be the idealized continuity program and capability, and yes, it is very difficult to attain, but we're really trying to give this flexibility in terms of how organizations want to score themselves, but yet maintain that ability for every organization to be compliant with any other standards and not need to change anything just because FEMA created this tool. This is a bit of an eye chart, so if you guys have the opportunity to look at the actual CAT at some point, it's a much better read. But in this sense, the scoring system is broken down by the capability. So the first question, this is in the getting started aspect, focusing on the planning. So the first question is, has your organization developed a continuity project plan to guide the development of your capability? So 0, no effort or recognition of a need to do a project plan, to all the way to 10, which is the organization adopted the project plan and is implementing it as outlined, and then everything in between. So you notice scores of 1, 3, 4, 6, and 7, and 9 are blank. So we intended for these to be kind of milestones, but again, we left in some fuzzy areas and gray areas for each organization to kind of customize this to where they think they should be or how they think they fit. So this is designed to be very flexible, because ultimately what this will generate is a CAT summary worksheet that you can show your leadership or show whoever's evaluating you to be able to be broken down by the different POETI elements, the initiating, building, and maintaining parts, and then an overall continuity capability score. So the scores designated as red or yellow are gaps, and you should probably invest in the resources and the time and energy to fix those gaps. Things that may be like green, you can say, okay, well, this is going fine. We can leave this alone this go around, but next time we'll need to make sure that we're still green. And it's designed to be a one-page snapshot to show leadership or show whoever how your organization is doing. So this is what it would look like. You'd see an average score based on all the different task areas that you answer the questions for, and you can see specifically where you would be red. So if you're building in the building phase and your equipment's red, it means, oh, I need to make some investments in the actual equipment to actually make my plan work so that I can have a capability. So you know, okay, I need to invest in this area. If you're red in the training area, it means, oh, I need to work on training my personnel, or I need to do exercises, or I need to rework the organization, or actually do more planning. So you can really tailor specifically what you can fix, go back into the CAT itself and kind of outline what milestones and what checkpoints do I have to hit to improve my score. So ultimately what the goal is, you have a kind of overarching idea of where you can see your gaps and make the case to get more investment, to get more things to invest in the capabilities that you're trying to build. So in that sense, we have a lot of stuff and things we've already created to help the community. we have the Continuity Resource Toolkit, and I think people are linking documents and linking different things. Be careful. There used to be a continuity guidance circular, and there used to be a continuity assistance tool. But if it's not the 2018 version, it is old. So these two documents, the CGC and the CAT, make sure it's a 2018 version, and it looks like that. It looks like what I've shown on the screen versus the older documents we've been trying to get rid of off the internet. But as you all know, once it's on the internet, you can't get rid of it, which is a shame. But we do continue to provide training updates, supporting materials. We've created a CGC translated into Spanish. We have a continuity plan template, which is available to download off of this webinar. We have devolution planning guides and templates. We have that BPA, BIA users guide to help you develop and conduct your business process analysis to understand how your organization functions, which is very important right now as you start dealing with COVID and what are essential functions and essential personnel. We do have a new continuity course. It replaced the old IS 546 Intro to Continuity. It's actually IS 1300. It's available online as well. It just came out about a couple of months ago. So if you're brand new to continuity or just want a refresher, I highly recommend taking the IS 1300 class. It's brand new and reflects some of the doctrine and the changes that we've made. We are also, involved in the exercise program nationally, and we have the GovDelivery platform. Granted, some of these things currently are kind of turned off right now because we're dealing with an operations, but it does show that ultimately FEMA is doing a lot of different things to make sure that we are still, making sure the continuity is at the forefront of what we're trying to push and make sure that we have a resilient nation that can support the response and recovery efforts to any kind of disaster. I kind of sped through this because I realized I was running a little short on time, but if you have any questions, the FEMA-CGC at fema.dhs.gov is kind of a generic email address for any questions that you have. We'll direct you to the appropriate people within the continuity office. You can download the continuity guidance circular off of the website that's on the screen right now, and also off the resource toolkit. So without further ado, I think that's it.
Wow, that was a lot of information. Let's see if maybe we can just answer one or two questions. So somebody had asked about how often a COOP plan should be reviewed, but he also added the stipulation, considering most of us are, from a volunteer organization and people come and go often. So is there a general rule of thumb as far as how often a plan should be reviewed, and does it make a difference as to what type of organization you are?
Everybody should have some form of continuity plan, whether you're a business, faith-based, school. It's, as we started to see, right now, COVID, how are people continuing their businesses? How are people continuing church? How are people continuing schooling? So it does not matter who you are. If you perform a function and you provide a service and you do a thing that you feel should continue, you should have a continuity plan. We do recommend at least annually. Well, we do recommend annually, taking a look at your plan once a year to make sure that processes haven't changed, technology hasn't changed, that you didn't learn something, throughout the course of the year that would result in, hey, my plan, didn't make sense when we had to deal with this situation. Maybe it's time to update that plan. So we do recommend annual updates, and everybody should think about continuity, and everybody should take a read or go ahead and read the continuity guidance circular to kind of get more context as to why.
Thank you. And I think that's all we really have time for today. I want to thank everyone for joining us. We do have some webinars coming up next week and the week after that I wanted to mention. On April 15th, we're going to have someone from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, as well as someone from the FDIC, talking about building an emergency preparedness fund and providing resources for people who might be in a financial crisis due to COVID-19. So they're going to share a lot of great information with us next Wednesday, April 15th from 12 to 1. And the following week on April 21st in the evening, we are sponsoring a webinar on effective interpersonal communication. The content was originally developed for CERT teams, but it is certainly fitting for anybody who is working with the public, and they will take the COVID-19 pandemic into consideration when they're presenting the materials. So those are two really good webinars coming up. Emma, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, and to all our listeners, be healthy, stay safe, have a great day. You're all free to drop.
Thanks, everybody.